Hey guys, it's Steve. I want to talk to you a little bit about something I'd like to call getting inside the National Registry's brain. I was interviewing a former student recently about what it felt like to go into the National Registry test for her and to take that test. And she said something that really stuck in my brain. You see, she had been in the medical field in the past. She had been a certified EMT in the past. And she had taken a lot of large tests like this one before, but this one really kind of psyched her out, if you will. And when I asked her why, the way she put it was she said, I couldn't stop thinking that this test was smarter than me. And that gave me a good laugh when she said that, but it also got me thinking about how a test that has this type of administration can get inside of our brain and give us concerns that, that the test is smarter than we are going in. The good news is it's not. You don't lose any smart points because you're sitting down at a computer to take your test. I want to tell you a little bit about the way that computer's thinking while you're sitting there taking that test. The inner workings of that test computer's brain is something called item response theory that's been around since the 1950s, and it's an idea that a test would respond to your responses with questions that were either more difficult or less difficult than the previous question that it gave you based on your responses. So it's a test that's tailoring itself to your ability as you go along. That's all that item response theory is, and that's really all that the National Registry Test Data Bank is doing. It's all that computer's doing when it's making question selections for you. It's looking at whether or not you got the last question correct or incorrect, and then it's deciding if it wants to give you a question that's more difficult or less difficult. If you've gotten the last question correct, then you're going to get a question that's a little more difficult. And if you get the last question incorrect, you're going to get a question that's a little less difficult, and then we're going to see where you go from there. Each question branching you off, either more or less difficult. Now, one question that comes up quite a bit when you explain that to people is, well, question difficulty, what does that mean? How does it know what's a difficult question or not? How does the computer know what would be a difficult question to me or to EMTs in general? Those results or that idea of difficulty comes from the fact that those questions are pilot tested ahead of time. You see, before any question can become a full-fledged, bona fide National Registry question, it has to go through pilot testing where hundreds and hundreds of EMTs who are taking the exam take that test question as if it's really part of their exam, having no idea that it's a pilot question. And then that data is collected into a data bank, and by the time that question becomes a real question on the National Registry test, the computer knows that out of 100 EMTs who it gives that question, it knows exactly how many are going to get it correct. So if it knows that only half of the EMTs that take that particular question get it right, that's going to be a question very high on the difficulty scale. If the computer knows that 92 out of 100 EMTs are going to answer that question correctly, well, that's a question that's going to be very low on the difficulty scale. So the pilot testing is what determines the question's difficulty. And then the item response theory just says that each time you answer that question, if you get it correct, you're going to get a question just a little bit harder. No reason to be freaked out about it. The computer really isn't that smart after all. And it's certainly not as smart as a good EMT who's prepared to take their exam. The next thing I want to do is I want to tell you in the next video a little bit about some of these products, and specifically I want to give you some free samples. I'll tell you about those free samples coming up in the next video, and I hope you'll take them.